Well, welcome to another edition of Public Affairs Public Access. My name is Ray Hill, and I'm the sometime host of this interesting program. It is an attempt by Houston Media Source to bring issues before you that you may have missed, something that, didn't come over your transom, but was out and discussed. And so we try to find things to talk about, and I try to find interesting guests to bring in. And the one that I get the most positive feedback is Douglas Caddy. Douglas Caddy is going to be my guest today. Actually, he is interviewing me as much as I am interviewing him, so we're just going to have a conversation here. Douglas Caddy is an attorney. He's a friend of mine. I've known Doug for a good many years. I met him, interestingly, I don't know exactly how I met him, but I remember we met and discussed things, and he was becoming even more progressive politically than I had been able to achieve at the point, and that was kind of a surprise because Douglas's background is in organizing in conservative politics. So I don't know exactly what that's all about. We may find out today, or we may not find that out today, because we're just going to have a conversation and let you eavesdrop in. Of course, you can call in during the course of this number. Every once in a while, a little number will appear at the bottom of the screen. And you can follow that number and become a part of the conversation. We're glad to have you. Kind of keeps us awake and makes us listen carefully to what you've got to say. And if we don't answer the question you ask, just ignore that. We'll answer another question. It won't make any difference. Hey, Doug, welcome to Public Affairs Public Access.
Well, Ray, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here.
You're an author?
Yes, I'm an author. I've had 6 books published, 3 by the Texas A&M University Press, and I'm actually working on 2 books right now.
And part of that is another segment in your memoir, which is Multi-Segment Operation.
Right, and then I'm working with a retired New York police detective on his memoirs. It's called the Confidential Diary of James Rothstein, NYPD Detective James Rothstein. He has some fantastic stories to tell about what happened when he was a police detective.
What fascinates you about the police stuff?
Well, I think everybody is fascinated by the police stuff, especially what's happening today and what is happening in Baltimore. And I know we talked about this in the past, Ray, and it occurred to me in what happened in Baltimore, where they transported this poor fellow, and his neck was almost severed, as I understand, from the spine. Mm-hmm. And then you've told me in the past that you had an experience where the police gave you a ride too, not as severe as that one, but...
Actually, I've had 2 of those. One of them, when I was arrested for referring to Officer Kelly and his partner using a noun unbecoming their relationship with their mothers. I don't think that's hard to figure out. And they arrested me for that and stopped what they were doing, which is what I wanted them to do. They were beating a young man in my front yard, and I wanted to stop that brutality. They threw me in the back of the squad car, except we didn't go downtown to 61 Reasoner Street, which was maxed out by taking the chute 8-9 blocks away. We headed out the Southwest Freeway, and when I figured out that where we were going was to the Beech Nut substation, and I knew at the time that what happened at the Beech Nut substation is people were beaten. It was kind of a hole in the system. Piece of police property where there wouldn't be any witnesses except police. There usually weren't even any arrested people there.
That's just been exposed in Chicago.
Right.
Similar case, just like that.
They had a place in the system where the skullduggery happened.
Right.
And so we were headed there, and as a news person, I knew that was what was going on there. And so I'm handcuffed in the back, and I'm in the back seat, very crowded. So the only thing I had to tap on the window with was my head. So I went bump, bump, bump. and he opened the window and said, "What?" And I said, "Open the wallet." I said, "If you will open the wallet, you will find there are press credentials in there. And I'm really Lois Lane. And there are some people that you cannot give full service at Beech Nut to."
You're actually Superman rather than Lois.
Yeah. Just look in there, and you'll find out you can't get away with it. Well, they looked in there and they found a trespass, and they closed the door, mumble. I couldn't tell what they were saying. But when we got to Beechnut, the sergeant knew me. And he said, "Oh, it's celebrity night. I did not know. I would have dressed better." and so I avoided getting my ass kicked.
Right.
In that way. Then the last time I got arrested, which really rings home with this Baltimore thing, the last time I got arrested is the driver of the squad car that transported me. Now, that's not the same officer that arrested me. It's not even the same officer that put me in the squad car. But the driver to transport me to the downtown jail, and his co-driver was a female officer, a male and a female officer. Well, he did the rough ride thing. I mean, every stop was a kick up in the rear, slam on the brakes, kind of every start was a vroom.
Are they required to put you a seatbelt on you in the back seat?
No. Well,
okay.
See, that Texas doesn't even have that rule.
Okay.
Texas doesn't have that rule.
So you're back there just...
Well, no, actually, I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
And so I know how to brace myself. And you can use the back of the seat that they're sitting in, the back of where I'm sitting. I'm handcuffed, and I'm at an awkward angle because of the peg leg. So I'm leveraged in there. When we get to the police station, they have to open the door, lift my artificial leg out first. So I'm wedged. So it doesn't really have any effect on me. But that poor woman police officer was bouncing over the door and hitting the dashboard. I mean, she was giving hell, and she was looking at him like, "Why the hell are you doing this?" It's normal operating procedure. He wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for me, but he didn't realize that I was braced well enough to protect myself. So I've been on those joy rides. Okay. And they do that. That's part of the subculture training.
Right.
And there are other things. I found out that the police supply store behind 61 Reasoner Street, you know, that used to be a church, but it's now a police supply store. They had a supercharger for your taser that literally made your taser a lethal weapon.
Wow.
So I went back there with some news media. We took some pictures of it, and they took them off shelf. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because if they had to use that on somebody and somebody died from the taser, yeah, and you could trace the officer buying intentionally a supercharger for his taser.
Well, I might mention that this was maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I was approached by the police to serve on the Civilian Review Board here in Houston that the police have, and was interviewed. And it was going well until I said something that I sort of made the interviewer scared. I might be an uncontrollable person if I got on the board. So I was not selected, but what I found out was that we do have a board, but they only get the cases that are referred to it by the chief of police.
And they have no subpoena power.
And so it's not really, we need it. And after that, I appeared before the city council and advocated the creation of an independent civilian review board. And actually, Chris Bell was council member at that time, and he fought. I had never met him, but he fought on my behalf. And wrote letters and so forth. He was very strong supporter of an independent civilian review board.
Well, I mean, the person who really began that struggle was Ada Edwards. Mm-hmm. And Ada Edwards and I were advocating civilian review board from the Ida Delaney thing and the Gilliam killing. It was a series of police killings, right, that was going on. But they thought we were Siamese twins. We were back to back on that issue for years. And then when she got on city council, she never could get enough votes together to pull it off. And if you can't get enough votes together, you're just barking up a holler tree. Mm-hmm. But yes, Houston needs it. Very few jurisdictions have your concept and my concept of independent civilian review board, because the police culture is extremely possessive of its power. Mm-hmm. And I think they're living in shock in Baltimore.
Yeah, I think what makes Baltimore unique is you have a prosecuting attorney, the state attorney, who was determined to go forward with this case, such as in Ferguson, the incident in Ferguson, it was a rigged grand jury. They managed to, rig these situations where they never really reached the situation like Baltimore has.
And the situation in Ferguson really upset me because I know how these things work. I know how cases are presented to grand juries. Yeah. I've had cases presented to grand jury against me, and I've participated in presenting cases to grand jury against somebody else. The district attorney goes in there and presents the essentials of his case. Or in the case of a woman district attorney, her case. They go in, they present that. They're not obliged to present the defense information. They just present the prosecuting because they're trying to tell the grand jury there is probable cause to proceed to a trial of this case on its merits.
But that did not happen in Ferguson.
At all in Ferguson. He went in there and threw everything he had, everything that come over the transom, things that he knew was not true. He threw it all at the grand jury, and you've got, well, grand juries can be 10 or 12. Then a full grand jury may meet, 10 of the grand jurors may meet. You have 10 or 12 people in there who are not lawyers, who are not trained in evidence, and you throw everything at them. It's bewildering, and it's just another gimmick to get the cop off.
Now, we've had this controversy in Harris County. And where does that stand now? I mean, there's been movement for reforming the grand jury system.
Well, I mean, you go to the legislature, and then the prosecutors don't want to give up the power because right now, I mean, the old saying in Texas is you can get a ham sandwich indicted because somebody went in and indicted a ham sandwich one time. Because if you go to the grand jury and say, here's the evidence, yada, 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 and we don't have anything else beside this, and the ham sandwich killed him, so let's indict the ham sandwich. So they did indict the ham sandwich. I guess the ham sandwich may still be doing time. I don't know. But the deal is that that's a cliche because that's the kind of control that prosecutors have on what the grand jury is exposed to.
Right. Well, I was a witness before a grand jury at one time. In the Watergate case. I actually was the first person, even though I was the attorney for the defendants, Hunt, Liddy, McCord, and the Cuban Americans, I was the first person subpoenaed before the federal grand jury investigating the case. And it came about, I was in the courthouse working on the case about 10 days after the case had broken, and Donald Campbell, one of the 3 prosecutors, came up to me and handed
you a subpoena, right? Boom.
Subpoena and said, forthwith, and grabbed me by the arm and pulled me into the grand jury room. And I appeared 6 times before the grand jury. And I will just say one thing. Here, it is reflected in the Oval Office tapes that the grand jury minutes were rigged. The grand jury was rigged.
Sure. And
that the prosecutor only asked questions that he wanted certain answers. He did not ask key questions, such as I was the first person approached with the hush money, and I tried to bring this out 1 month after the case broke before the grand jury, and
they didn't want to go there.
Seymour Glanzer, one of the 3 prosecutors, cut me off immediately and switched to another subject. They were under instructions, and this is the Oval Office tapes, not to go into other areas, you know. Not only that.
Now wait a minute. Let's go back on this because I think this is an important thing. Here you were, an attorney.
Yeah.
What kind of practice did you have?
I was with a law firm that that engaged in labor law, representing both management and unions.
Okay, so you were cutting a baby in half in worker rights versus corporate protection from.
Right.
Okay, you're cutting a baby in half. You were doing what lawyers do. Let's look at the case, and my assignment is to do this. And you may be on this side this time and this side the next time, right? That kind of practice?
Well, in a sense, I was aligned with the management side.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so you were not doing plaintiff's law. You were doing defense law.
Yeah.
In civil court.
Yeah. Yeah. We were not a criminal law firm.
No. You didn't do any criminal.
But the way I got involved in the case was I had known Howard Hunt previously. I had met him. I was working for General Foods Corporation before I went with the law firm.
Okay.
And they sent me from White Plains, New York, which is the corporate headquarters, to Washington, D.C. This is in 1969, and they said, we want you to open up our office, but for our first year, we want you to work out of the Robert Mullen Company, which is our public relations firm. And so it started in 1969, I did that. And
was that basically a lobbyist assignment?
Yes, it would be a lobbyist assignment. I was going to be the Washington representative in lobbying with the Grocery Manufacturers Association and so forth. And I was there for 6 months when Howard Hunt joined the staff of the Mullen Company. I was a General Foods employee. But Howard Hunt,
you were working in that office? I
was assigned to work in that office for the first year and then open its own office for the General Foods Corporation. And Richard Helms, the head of the CIA, placed Howard Hunt in the Mullen Company, in quote, retirement, close quote, okay? And so Hunt and I started talking, and it turned out that William F. Buckley was the godfather to his children, and I had previously in the conservative movement, I'd worked very closely with William F. Buckley and actually had an article published in National Review magazine.
I don't think people understand what an icon William F. Buckley was to the whole idea of a conservative movement in America.
Well, that is true, but I must also point out that he was a CIA agent. He worked under Howard Hunt in Mexico City when he was graduated from Yale University. And he wrote that. And then he went to Mexico City and worked under Howard Hunt as a CIA agent.
CIA agent.
Then he went back and wrote that book, God and Man at Yale, which made him famous, and then he started National Review. And the chairman of the board of National Review was William Casey. And William Casey was...
I still remember that picture where they're ushering William Casey through Bethesda Hospital.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he's under arrest being taken to his demise, which happened soon thereafter, or whether he's being well escorted and defended.
As his capacity as director of the CIA. So
those folks know a lot of things, don't they?
Yeah. And so National Review has always been a question in my mind, you know, where the money came for the founding of National Review, you know, because the CIA has, and I learned this from Hunt, the CIA has a right hand and a left hand. And they don't know, neither know what the other hand is doing, okay? And
is that the nature of the animal? I mean, is that just the nature of skunk works, is that you have these opposing forces under the same roof? And
at least it is with the CIA. And I think they've decided this is the way they want it, because the CIA hasn't been involved in many criminal activities. I mean, you can really trace the drug trade, international drug trade.
Oh yeah, I mean, those are famous.
Yeah. But there are good people in the CIA working on the other side, okay? And so, so anyway, when I went with the law firm, Howard Hunt asked to be my client. He came to me and said, I have some legal problems. They were ordinary problems, drafting a will, representing him in dealings with his publishers. He was an author and things like that. And so when Watergate broke,
And you were doing that on site?
I was doing that for the law firm.
Okay, the law firm was paying you, and that was under those...
Well, he was a client of the law firm.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a client of the law firm. Well, he was an actual client of the law firm. These were ordinary things. And I had a partner of the law firm, Robert Scott, there were only 3 partners of the law firm, who was assisting me in Hunt's affairs, okay? And the arrest at Watergate took place on June 17th, right after midnight, somewhere around 1 a.m. And Hunt called me about 3 a.m. from his White House office and asked if he could come to my residence, which was about half a mile to a mile from the White House and from Watergate. He said there was an urgent matter he wanted to talk about, and he came to my residence and told me what had occurred at Watergate and retained me to represent him, and then he called Gordon. I had to testify about all this before the grand jury.
Was that part of your regular duties representing the firm, or did he retain you separately?
No, as it worked out, I called Robert Scott, who was the only partner in town. That one partner was on the eastern shore of Maryland and one was in Italy, and so I called Robert Scott while Hunt was there and explained what Hunt had told me. And so it became the case became a client of the firm.
Okay.
Okay. But we were not a criminal law firm. Yeah. And so Robert Scott said, I said to Robert Scott, I have to go to the arraignment, but we have to have a skilled criminal attorney. And so he found one for me. But before that, Hunt called Gordon Liddy And I spoke from my apartment, and this is about 4:30 in the morning, about several hours after the arrest, and Gordon Liddy retained me, and they both retained me to represent the 5 arrested individuals.
Okay, how can you do that, representing 5 people in a same event? Isn't that a conflict of interest?
Well, at that point in time, nobody knew that Hunt and Liddy were involved in the case. Okay. We realized there'd be a separation further down the road. The main thing, our intent was to get the 5 arrested out on bail as quickly as possible.
Sure.
Hopefully this case would just go unnoticed. But what happened was the arresting officer, Carl Schaffler, was actually a military intelligence officer working with.
He had more than one job.
He'd been assigned to the Washington, D.C. police. He was the one that arrested the people at Watergate. He was just parked a block away. He was waiting for the arrest. He had been tipped off that that there was going to be a burglary. He was just waiting for the call to come. And he called the Washington Post right after the arrest and told them what had occurred. And so, and the counsel of the Washington Post was Edward Bennett Williams, as he was the Democratic National Committee. And so when I went to arraignment, actually the prosecutors and the press knew more than I knew about the case, because they had been tipped off by Carl Schaffler. They'd been briefed by the arresting officer, who was acting not on behalf of the police department. He was doing this on behalf of the military intelligence. Military intelligence was determined to bring down Richard Nixon, and he is actually Deep Throat. Carl Schaffler, the arresting officer, is actually Deep Throat.
Actually Deep Throat. So he was before the beginning.
He was trained by the CIA. He worked for years at the CIA facility in Virginia, which intercepts all the traffic to the embassies, all the eavesdropping, all the wiretap traffic. He was skilled in that area.
Why would the military be so opposed to Richard Nixon?
Well, they actually had a scandal. They had a spy within the Oval Office reporting back to the Pentagon. This became a big scandal, and it's written up in a book called Silent Coup by Lynn Kolodny. And they were monitoring, and the fellow that was doing this actually opened Henry Kissinger's briefcase. That he was in charge of security for Kissinger's briefcase. He photographed over 1,000 documents out of Henry Kissinger's briefcase, all of which went right back to the Pentagon. And I think this goes on today. The Pentagon, the military has its own intelligence, okay, as does the CIA.
Sure.
And so.
Sure. I remember I was anti-Vietnam War, so I knew about the various branches of military intelligence and how they sometimes function at cross purposes with other intelligence agencies. Common knowledge.
Right. But I think the fate of Nixon was sealed that night of the break-in, because military intelligence was on the case then, and they knew about it before. They knew about the break-in, the plan for the break-in 2 weeks before it took place. They knew about it.
Doug.
And so they had an agenda to bring down Nixon.
Doug, that history was made by the minute.
Yeah, by the minute.
By the minute. There was history created by the minute. And there you were.
Yeah.
I mean, and it came over your transom from Howard Hunt.
Yes, literally.
Literally flew over the transom.
Woke me up in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen to other people.
What happened to me was that on the first week of July, I was approached with, I had these mysterious phone calls I received where someone wanted me to pass hush money to the defendants, okay? And so I went to the managing partner of the law firm, who actually was a former assistant U.S. attorney, and he said, if this fellow has anything to discuss, have him come to the law firm. He wanted me to meet him outside, okay? So we arranged for him to make one final phone call over the 4th of July, and at which time I turned down whatever he was trying to do.
Yeah.
And it came out later on he was acting on behalf of John Dean. This was Anthony Ulasewicz, a former NYPD detective who was the courier for the money, and I told him, and this came out later on, and I turned down the hush money, and somebody else, a succeeding.
Well, why would you turn down the hush money? That what?
Well,
they would put money into your trust account as a practice.
What he offered was what Ulasewicz said to me is, I will deliver to your office cool, clean laundry in any amount that you say, any amount that you say. you know. And so, you know, I listened to him. I said, well, you know, I had to go back and talk to my partners, you know.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. The partners, I was not a partner, I was just an associate. I had to go back and talk to them, you know. And so it turned down. He went to the next attorney who succeeded me in representing Hunt, and that attorney, who was a partner of the major law firm in Washington, a major law firm, took the money that I turned down. And he later became an unindicted co-conspirator in the case. I was never accused, but I will say this, on July 12th, which is...
You did the ethical thing.
I did the ethical thing, but on July 12th, Judge Sirica accused me of being a principal in the case in open court, and said unless I answer all these questions before the grand jury, he would hold me in contempt. I refused to answer 38 questions on the advice of my attorneys.
And the basis of the question was the attorney-client relationships at the time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Because at that point, Hunt and Liddy were still unknown. They had not been disclosed. And so we were trying to keep them from being disclosed. So
and you had an obligation. As
had an obligation, absolutely.
Attorney-client, there's a higher ethic that comes.
I had orders from my clients not to disclose this, you know. And so Judge Sirica, I refused to answer those questions before the grand jury, and Sirica held me in contempt and jailed me. And this is a big thing at the time. The New York Times had a big write-up, and Woodward and Bernstein, who I came to know very well,
sure,
and saw not too long ago.
Not too long ago, you read.
Yeah, wrote this up, you know, and this is a big thing, and it's discussed in the Oval Office tapes. Nixon is meeting with Ehrlichman and discussing, because the Court of Appeals upheld Sirica's decision to hold me in contempt. So I either had to go to jail and sit for months there, or I had to go before the grand jury. And my lawyers advised me we had built a strong enough record of fighting this thing that you can go now before the grand jury and answer the questions, because later on they may have tainted this case, so the defendants will go free if they are convicted for what they've done to me as their attorney. So that was, and so I answered all the questions. But that is where I tried to bring up that I'd got these calls, these mysterious phone calls.
With this
hush money.
The hush money, and they didn't want to go there.
They didn't want, and that was 1 month after the case broke. And so going forward, when McCord wrote his letter in March the next year, and the whole thing blew up, and the hush money came forward and so forth, I was back before the grand jury, but I said to the prosecutors, don't you realize, you remember, I tried to bring this out, and Seymour Glanzer cut me off. They realized, that they were the hunters, but now they were going to become the hunted, basically, you know. The ball game had changed.
The ball game
had changed.
Let me talk to these people just a moment. Obviously, some of this information you haven't been exposed to. Obviously, the whole Watergate thing, those of you who are old enough to remember it, is of interest to you. You can give us a call. The telephone number will appear every once in a while across the bottom of the screen, and we'll put you on the air. You can ask Doug some questions, and as long as it's kind of germane to that. Now, I know there's a whole bunch of you that are just literally too young to have any identity with the water. You hear the word Watergate, but they put gate on everything now. You can have Watergate, you can have Pillgate, you can have Emailgate, everything. Well, all of that started in a scandal that would ultimately bring down a president of the United States named Richard Nixon. Bring down a president of the United States named Nixon. That is an amazing thing to have happened. And what Doug is exposed to, being something came over his transom, that's the little window over your door that you can throw things over without opening the door, happened in the middle of the night, telephone call. And suddenly he's caught up in something, and in the process of tracing that through, he finds how these agencies work, sometimes at internal cross purposes. In other words, you've seen the cartoons in Mad Magazine of the white spy and the black spy. Well, sometimes they're members of the same agency, and they have this game to play. And this game is very important, very dangerous in many ways to our understanding of liberty, really. So if you're interested in any of that, give us a call. We'll entertain your questions and try to answer them as best we can.
It is about Watergate, but the key to Watergate is the Kennedy assassination, and I think everybody knows the Kennedy assassination.
Well, I do, well, except there's a whole generation of people out there to whom that doesn't mean anything because they don't remember the dream of Camelot, and I remember all of that.
Right, yeah. But that has the role of the importance of the Kennedy assassination to Watergate was not revealed until about 10 years ago. It was hidden by those who were involved, basically. Okay, but you take Howard Hunt and Bernard Barker, two of the burglars. Three of the burglars: Howard Hunt, Bernard Barker, and Frank Sturgis. Were the burglars. They were also involved in the Kennedy assassination. If you read Howard Hunt's deathbed confession, he identifies those individuals. And so it was the same crew that was involved in 1963. My understanding, there were 3 assassin teams in Dallas. And there was going to be one at the Mercantile Mart, right? Mm-hmm. At the luncheon, but actually the assassination took place before the
before he got there.
Before they got there, and the last place would be at the airport, for his departure, if they didn't have the chance to do it. So there were really 3 teams, and these individuals were on one team. And so here they show up 10 years later, about 10 years later, and they're going into Watergate. Now, why did they go into Watergate? They went into Watergate for three primary reasons. First, they had a bug in there that was not working, and they went back in there
to fix the bug, because they were eavesdropping on what the Democratic National Convention was doing,
right.
The committee was doing.
Mm-hmm. And secondly, there was an allegation, which has been pretty much proven since then, there was a prostitution ring being operated out of the DNC, and they wanted to get the names of the clients, both the male prostitution ring and the female prostitution ring.
When they had, whatever you want, they had it.
Okay. And
supermarket prostitution ring.
Yeah. Blackmail in compromising people is the name of game in politics, and especially with intelligence agencies. Now, McCord was very much interested in this. McCord was one of those burglars who were arrested. He was with the CIA, and the CIA wanted that information. The CIA wanted that information. They wanted the books. The books indicated who the clients were, and so did the Republicans, the White House too. But the diary of the madam who was running the prostitution ring was later disclosed in a book called White House Call Girl by Phil Stanford. It was published a year ago, and inside her diary are a list of about a dozen Nixon White House staffers who were clients of the prostitution ring.
Oh, okay.
So, and some of those were prominent in Watergate. So there was a reason why those individuals were worried about their names being disclosed. If these they wanted to know if their names were in these books. Okay, that was one reason they went in there. And the last reason they went in there was a belief on the part of Hunt and Bernard Barker and the Cuban Americans that there were Cuban intelligence government reports in there which would disclose what really happened in the Kennedy assassination. Don't forget Castro. Yeah. Castro he had nothing to do with the assassination, but at one point in time they tried to link him. Yeah. I remember that effort. So he had a vested interest in it. He had his own spies within the Miami Cuban community, just as we had CIA spies inside Cuba. So he knew what was going on ahead of time inside the United States. And so they wanted to know what was in these intelligence reports. Now, why would the intelligence reports be there? Why would they be there?
In the Democratic National Committee.
Because the chairman of the Democratic National Committee before, at that time, had been the lobbyist for Howard Hughes in Washington, D.C. And this is where it gets a little complicated, but in 1960, Richard Nixon, who was still vice president, contacted Howard Hughes and said, this is part of history now, I mean, you can find these documents, that he wanted Castro killed, but he didn't want the government's fingerprints on it. And
well, they went to Howard Hughes for a lot of things at that time, because number one, he had the money. It was was kind of a weirdo patriot,
Right.
and he built vessels so that they could do things that
Yeah.
were covert. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Larry O'Brien was his lobbyist, and so the question was, in the eyes of the Republicans, was whether Larry O'Brien had learned of what Nixon had said in operation in 1960, which ultimately, in many ways, led to the assassination of Kennedy. See, what happened was Nixon set up this operation with Hughes, and they proceeded. Hughes delegated to Robert Mayhew. In turn, he recruited the CIA, which was already working on this, and the Mafia, and the Cuban community. But what happened was Nixon was not elected in 1960. And so this operation continued on without the Kennedy brothers knowing it. Kennedy became president, his brother became attorney general, but they didn't know that this operation was going forward with these same individuals, with the CIA and the Mafia and the Cuban community all working to kill Castro. And so the Bay of Pigs came along in 1961, and the Cuban community blamed Kennedy for the disaster of the Bay of Pigs, which was really not his fault. Howard Hunt wrote a book.
Was mismanaged.
That was Howard Hunt. Yeah, Howard Hunt actually, in my conversation with him, he blamed the two officials in the CIA rather than JFK for the primary responsibility for the failure of the Bay of Pigs. But the larger Cuban community never accepted that, you know. And remember, Kennedy went to Miami and at a stadium right after the Bay of Pigs debacle, so to speak, and gave a speech and tried to mend fences. But there was an antagonism there. These people were determined.
Which it manifests today. I mean, the split among Cuban Americans, the descendants of those Cuban exiles or expatriates,
Right.
are still very deeply Republican because of Bay of Pigs.
So the third purpose, as I say, was to get the intelligence reports of the Cuban government there, and if they could trace it back to where Nixon gave that original order to Howard Hughes. This was the 1972 election. Can you imagine that coming out in the 1972 election? Can you imagine McGovern, the Democratic candidate, saying, let me tell you
about this.
Let me tell you about this, and let me tell you why Kennedy was assassinated and so forth. But the CIA did not want this to come out either because they were so deeply involved, you know. They were in the assassination.
Well, recently we've had some shakeups in Secret Service.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we've had some recent examinations of CIA, but you never get to the full bottom. You just get little reflections that there are problems, and somehow or other people that there are problems with keep their jobs. And this goes on and on. It's as if what surfaces is quickly swept under the rug, and the same culture continues. Is that accurate? I mean,
that's accurate, but the CIA is still sitting on thousands of documents it refuses to release on the Kennedy assassination. And many of the Secret Service documents were all destroyed. And I'm suspicious that even when these documents the CIA documents are released, they've been so sanitized, or the ones have been destroyed, that there won't be anything there that will cause a great ripple. But people are determined to get those too, you know, because this is an important part of history.
Yeah, I guess they think that they're just going to outlive the questions. I mean, they're going to get to be a point, there'll be a couple of generations go by, and people will stop asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
The Kennedy assassination is one issue that has had some difficulty outliving the questions.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and if you link Watergate to it, which there is a natural link there, then Watergate won't be forgotten either, and Nixon won't be forgotten either. For what he started.
Well, given all that you know, and you've been able to peek behind the curtain on this, what is your impression of Richard Nixon?
Well, in retrospect, Nixon was not that bad a president. He was actually liberal in many ways. You know, he started the Office of Economic Opportunity. He wanted a national health system. There were a number of things where he was very reasonable on.
When he started the war on drugs, he's the one that kicked off the war on drugs.
Yeah.
More than half of the money went for drug treatment and prevention than went for incarceration and imprisonment. and then subsequently things lost
Right.
that direction.
But you have to contrast what Nixon, the evil Nixon, people think of evil Nixon, they still talk about the evil Nixon, to what we face today. Nixon never had the power that Obama has to order the assassination, to order the killing of American citizen, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we've gone so much further, and we're now being wiretapped, we're now being surveilled. I mean,
Well, was there a court opinion about that just came up today?
Yeah, and the post office photographs every envelope. Can you imagine that? Every envelope, the outside of every envelope is photographed by the post office every day.
They're making an eternal record of my poor penmanship.
And the bills I received from on my credit cards, they have all those in there. But I mean, what Nixon did was almost like, oh my God, you know, this is like almost amateur
Petty
hour.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, penny, you know, just minor stuff compared to. But you did have Hunt and Liddy. I knew Hunt very, very well. I knew him for many years. And his wife, Dorothy. There's going to be a book coming out by St. John Hunt, one of their sons, about Dorothy. Dorothy was a CIA agent too. She's a fascinating person, but she died in a mysterious plane crash.
Kind of like Martha Mitchell.
Like Martha Mitchell. Martha Mitchell, yeah. There are feelings that, you know, she did not contract cancer naturally, you know. And there's really been a question there. And in Dorothy's case, her plane crashed in Chicago, you know, and she was carrying a sum of money at that time, and so forth.
Well, were you aware of all the skunk work stuff at the time, or have you discovered this progressively?
Oh, progressively. It's been like peeling an onion, and we still haven't gotten to the center of the onion. There's still a lot to be found out. There's still a lot to be found out about Watergate and about the Kennedy assassination. But as I say, they're interwoven.
Knowing all of this, do you have trouble being patriotic to the country, to the cause? Does that interfere with? What opinion should we have of our government if we know that it has progressively gotten more power-grabbing and expanded its ability to wreak misery on the lives of citizens?
Well, this may shock the viewers, but I think of the U.S. government as a criminal operation now. I really do. All aspects of the federal government, a criminal operation. And one of my heroes, so to speak, is Catherine Austin Fitts, who was Undersecretary of HUD under the first Bush. And she maintains that HUD is a criminal operation, was a criminal operation. When she was there, she knew about it. She tried to expose it and so forth. And so I think we're in the late days of what our founding fathers wanted our republic to be. We're phasing into a dictatorship, basically. And so.
Well, you know, when you get statistics like it cost $4,000 to put a $200 welfare check in the hands of a single parent. Now that's a criminal operation. Mm-hmm. I mean, the bureaucracy eats more resources than it delivers in benefits to the people who need it.
Well, what I found out is that there are two economies, okay? There are two economies. There's the one we accept, which has the national budget, and the one everybody works under, think this is the way the country is run. And there's the black budget, which everybody knows there is a black budget, which nobody knows how the money is spent. Congress appropriates about a huge amount of money for that each year, but even Congress does not know how it's being spent. And then there's the super black budget, which only a few people know how it's being spent. And my research, the super black budget began in 1947 when the National Security Act was created. And it has progressed since then. And my estimate now is that about $400 trillion has gone into the secret black budget. The secret black budget.
$400 trillion.
All accounted for, unaccounted for, all unaccounted for. And you can start with World War II You can start with all the gold that we got from Japan that had been hidden by the Japanese, that they had gotten from China and from Indonesia and so forth.
Sure.
That was the beginning, which all disappeared. That was the beginning of, and then the CIA, with the drug trade out of Vietnam.
Well, drugs have been a very important thing. The Iran-Contra thing, the connection between getting selling arms to Iran, right, and financing the Contra operation through drug smuggling and the arms sale. That's a whole economy that was hidden from everybody at the time. Yeah. And when it came to the surface, what happened to that? Nobody took the blame. Nobody, yeah, right.
Yeah. But the publisher of one of my books is Chris Milligan of Trine Day Books, and his father was in OSS like Hunt was. Hunt goes back to OSS, which was the predecessor of the CIA, and then his father went into the CIA. And his father sat down with Chris when Chris matured and said, "Let me tell you what Vietnam is all about. It's not about a war against the communists.
No.
It's about drugs. It's about drugs." And he said, and his mother said, "Let me tell you," at this meeting with Chris Milligan, "let me tell you a story. There was a battle reported in the New York Times, a major battle in Vietnam that never took place. And what happened on that day? We, her husband, the CIA agent, and I, and his mother, were meeting at a picnic with the leaders in Hanoi, at a picnic. It was all," he said, the father was furious. The father felt all his work on behalf of like we think, you know.
Yeah.
He felt, you know, this was not what he wanted. This is not what he thought America was all about. It was about importing drugs, and the purpose of that, once again, was to get all this money into this super secret black budget, super secret black budget. And I also mentioned that years ago I met, I'll just say a sergeant who was in the Air Force, and he was the bodyguard to a general in Vietnam, and he told me several things. I'll just mention one of them. There was a warehouse in Saigon where anything was for sale. Anything was for sale, and they would sell it to anyone. They'll sell it to Viet Cong, they'll sell it to anyone, okay? And actually Life magazine had an article about this at the time. He used to accompany the general there to look at what was going on with these transactions. All that money was going into the pockets of the military, okay? And in the midst of the Vietnam War, the American hierarchy in the Pentagon and in Vietnam went to Moscow for 1 week, and the bodyguards went with him. He went as bodyguard to Moscow. And the bodyguards were well taken care of with wine and good food and so forth, while their bosses met for a whole week with their counterparts in Moscow. Okay? Now there's a story, an untold story, that, you know, you have to wonder what was being discussed there. When he got out of the military, well, he didn't get out of the military, he came back. Actually, he was stationed in Las Vegas, of all places, and then he was transferred to Alaska. Somehow somebody wanted him out of Las Vegas, so transferred to Alaska, and his assignment was to meet the military planes as they landed. He was a military policeman. Yeah. And so he went out to meet this plane that was landed, and he went in on board. The plane was full of marijuana everywhere, chock full of marijuana. Yeah. And there was one general sitting there, and he said,
"What the hell are you doing here?"
You won't remember anything, right? You're not going to remember anything. And he and his wife and family
Well, I mean, the English pretty much plowed that field whenever they forced China to buy opium.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That became a government function. It was an official function.
Trace that to the monarchy. Yeah, you trace right to the queen and king.
Which this guy that Democratic guy, I forget his name, who always thought that Elizabeth was a drug dealer.
LaRouche.
LaRouche.
Yes.
LaRouche. Yeah. There's some substance to what LaRouche said, because the powers that be in the United Kingdom of the Empire, in the Empire days, were forcing people to get addicted to drugs so they can make money off of them.
Well, this retired NYPD detective I'm working with traced a drug shipment that ended up in the palace, the Royal Palace there in London. You know, that's where it ended up, you know. This is not that too long ago, okay?
Yeah, you reckon Elizabeth's doing any snorting? Something's keeping her alive.
I mean, so the key to reading back to to the secret societies at Yale and so forth, a lot of it goes back to even the Forbes fortune and so forth goes back to drugs, basically, you know. And so this is a key, and people think there's a war on drugs. There is a war on drugs, but they're after the little people.
Yeah, they're after, yeah. The soldiers can go to battle, but the generals got a deal cut.
Right. And this goes back to what we were discussing before. The purpose of the police is to keep the little people, the poor people and the middle class under control. And I'll give you an example, Occupy Wall Street. Who crushed Occupy Wall Street, which was the people's movement to expose what was going on on Wall Street? It was Bloomberg, the mayor Bloomberg, okay, the billionaire.
Well, for good reason, because Bloomberg is where the action is.
Action. And so we had Occupy Wall Street here in Houston. They were down here at the park, right, in downtown Houston. I took food and blankets, and at one point I exited the park, and I came upon a man and a woman sitting on a bench, and they jumped up when they saw me. They didn't see me until I was right in front of them. I knew exactly they were they were intelligence agents. You know, they were conferring, and they rushed back to join the group back there. And so what happened?
Oh yeah. Well, but see, you can't do anything in activism these days without getting heavily infiltrated. Yeah. So how you just assume that I mean the anti-war, anti-Vietnam War. I mean the whole Socialist Workers Party couldn't hold a meeting without 5 or 6 agents in there. Right. They needed them to make quorum for the meeting.
Okay.
And all of that's been documented. That COINTELPRO exposed all of that.
Yeah.
Of how not only, and I got where I could point them out. The ones that wanted to do the most radical, dangerous stuff, those are cops. Undercover agents.
But don't forget what happened here. Remember, the leaders of the Occupy Wall Street in Houston were arrested because they went down, I guess near the ship channel somewhere. Yeah. And they linked. There was some sort of pipe. They linked.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I bet we've covered that on previous shows.
Just to wrap up, though, who set that up? It was the Austin.
It was a cop. Yeah.
Austin Police Department came down here, and convinced these people they were members of the Occupy Wall Street, and here we have this idea for them.
Yeah, the dragon sleeves. And well, in the movement, if you hear something like dragon sleeves, the drama of it, that should set off an alarm. It's basically bull crap.
Yeah.
But the kids at Occupy didn't see that was a fantasy.
Yeah. And so most of these incidents you read about where the FBI uncovers this plot to do this or do that, it's all set up by the FBI. They find these gullible people and then lead them on, supply them what they need, and then arrest them, and we have these...
Oh, well, you know, most of these horrible terrorist arrests that are made, if you scratch the surface and you look at it, it's mostly set up. And there was one arrest, my sister was on the federal grand jury. And I know I'm not supposed to discuss, but she's dead, so she can't be prosecuted anymore. And she was telling about this A&M guy, this guy at A&M that was this Muslim terrorist and all of that. And as she's telling me this, I can see the real story behind the evidence that she's receiving in the grand jury. And what it was this guy is totally innocent player set up by these federal agencies. He didn't have any access to getting any of the materials that he was supposedly going to use as an act of terrorism. So the agents more than gladly provided them. And you could go step by step by step. This guy was the most innocent person in the room, being set up by these undercover Fed cops.
Right.
But when the acts failed, they went and corkscrewed him out of there. We're going to convict him of all things. You know what happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Somebody snitched on the cops.
Uh-huh.
And the case just kind of went away.
Oh, okay, right. They don't want sunlight to shine on these things.
It's like cockroaches. You turn on the lights, you don't know where they go.
I used to be a big admirer of the FBI. I was one of those. I was an admirer of J. Edgar Hoover.
Well, you know, people accuse me of having the J. Edgar Hoover gene because I don't get a lot of gay genes. Obviously, I don't get the fashion gene. Obviously, I don't have the decorator gene. But I do have the J. Edgar Hoover. I know a lot of stuff about a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay, right, yeah.
And I can use that effectively. There's a new documentary about my using that effectively against a former Houston police chief.
This documentary is, what's the title of this
Well,
documentary?
the documentary is The Trouble with Ray, and it's about my trying to stop the arrest of lesbians with fly front pants on by going to the police chief about whom I knew something. And in a room full of other people, only he and I knew what I was talking about.
The chief of police here in Houston?
Yeah, Herman Short. He knew what I was talking about, and I knew what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And the current police chief said, well, you just blackmail that sucker. And I said, not so you could make a case out of it.
Okay.
And that's the trick. I'm going to talk to these folks for just a second. That's the trick. You don't want them to make a case out of it, right? In other words, you don't want to wind up with any charges of blackmail and all that. But if you got secret information, use it in a clever way so that it doesn't work in a case. Doug Caddy, thank you very much for being my guest.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor, Ray.
It's always a joy to have a conversation with you, and I hope you enjoy this tape. Now, if you are watching this and it is not May the 7th, between 6:30 and 7:30, ignore the questions to call because it ain't live. But I'm glad to have you, the audience, out there. Houston Media Source, hmstv.org and hmsnetradio.org. We are about the business of providing media access to people whose voices otherwise would not be heard. I'm talking about yours. There are things going on with your circle of friends or your community or even your neighborhood that need to be exposed to the media. Well, we're the folks that do that. We do that. We have Channel 17. You're watching me now. You will watch this show in the future there. We're a very valuable asset to a city as diverse as Houston. So I want to ask you, seriously, what are you not getting in your media? And what can you do to make sure that other people get what they need to hear? And what do? You go to www.hmstv.org, main website, follow it there. Thank you for listening. Doug, I'll have you back.
Thank you, Ray.